before or after you fill out Hannah's surveys, I would invite you to come to the front table here. This is kind of fun. There are a few items with connections to the 1893 Columbian Exhibition in Chicago. Not my sunglasses, though. I should probably remove those. So I brought a few things, and then I had emailed Morgan Miller, who's the curator here, and I just kind of asked. I didn't know, but I asked her. I said, you know, did somebody from Lima, you know, go to the fair, and then, you know, this stuff gets passed down through families, and then eventually there's some kid or grandkid who doesn't want it anymore, and so they donate to the museum. And when Morgan got back to me, she said, "Oh yes." And so there are a few items that I can identify a couple of these things at the up the table, and maybe at the right time, maybe I'll talk about one or two of them. So I'm a faculty member at Ohio Northern in Ada, just up the road, and I'm a big World's Fairs guy. Now I've talked about this particular fair on a couple of occasions, though I have never been asked for any fair to zero in on a singular pavilion. And with the Art of Domesticity exhibit that opened about a week and a half ago, well, I think it was the impetus for this. I think it was a lunch meeting. Hannah and Morgan and Christine, the director. This came up, and so I'm not an art historian. I'm just a history guy. But so I will do my best. Okay, but. I want to start with maybe a dozen slides just at the front of this, just to talk about the fair in general. So this stereograph of the woman's building, not women's, but woman with an A, woman's building. This caption is incorrect on the stereograph. Okay. This is the structure. This was not the first nor the last women's pavilions at World's Fairs. The first one was at the 1876 Philadelphia the Centennial Exhibition. And then I went to grad school in Buffalo. We had the next great fair in 1901, the Pan Am, where McKinley got shot. There was a women's pavilion there that was it was actually in a golf club when the club was moving out to the suburbs, and it was vacant right at the time of the fair. So it's not the first nor the last, but I will say architecturally, this is far and away the grandest of women's pavilions here. Okay. So World's Fair basics. Now these things, they still happen, though they're not nearly the spectacle that they once were. For my money, I would probably say that the last two great World's Fairs were in the 1960s, New York and Montreal. Some of you see a couple of head nods. They do still happen, but you know, Astana 2022 didn't. Osaka this year probably doesn't generate the pop culture interest that they did in the past. Okay, so these are massive spectacles that run about 6 months. I usually tell my students, if you can kind of imagine a fair rolled in with the Olympics, rolled in with every museum you can kind of think about, rolled in with Disney World and Las Vegas, you're kind of on the right track with what a World's Fair was all about. Okay, and if you go on Wikipedia, this is kind of a fun list to look at. If you go on Wikipedia and you just look at the list of expositions that start in, the first great one's in London in 1851. But for about a century, every great city of the West, so mainly Europe and the United States, this is where the majority of these things are held. Okay, and they are. What do you see if you go there? You see stuff, 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 and more stuff. Okay, and I will show you some of that stuff today. Okay, so this is often where campus-like fairgrounds were constructed. At Chicago in 1893, there were 200 buildings that were constructed for this fairground. And this is really a celebration, right? This is a celebration. This is where new products get brought to market. Okay. And then there are some aspects of World's Fairs that are very much of the time in which they occurred. And it's kind of hard to overstate how big these things were in popular culture when they happened. We just had a Summer Olympic Games here in Paris. When Paris hosted its first Olympics in 1900, it was held in conjunction, but it was the lesser of the event to a World's Fair. When St. Louis hosted the Judy Garland Meet Me in St. Louis Fair, the winner of the gold medal for golf discovered that he won the gold medal in the Olympics. He just thought it was an event for the fair. Okay? When London hosted the 1908 Olympics, it originally was supposed to be in Italy, and then Mount Vesuvius exploded and Naples had to be rebuilt. And so London was already hosting a World's Fair, planned for '08. All they needed to add was a stadium. Okay, and that's how London got the fair. So the first three fairs of the first three Olympics of the 20th century, they were all second fiddle to a World's Fair. Okay. And I was asked to talk a bit about the woman's building in 1893 Chicago. And in American history, it's a really kind of an interesting time because we know that women do not achieve suffrage for another 25 years or so. But there is certainly a suffragist movement. Okay? And 1893, things are, in some respects, are looking up. Our progress is at hand in theory, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we move along here. So the Columbian exhibition was supposed to, well, it marked 400 years since Columbus landed in the New World. It was now, as you know, it was in 1493 that Columbus sailed. Right? No, the fairground wasn't done in time in 1892. So there was a grand opening in October, but the fair itself did not open until May of 1893. This is in Jackson, what is now Jackson Park in Chicago, which is right along Lake Michigan. And I have an arrow right on where the woman's building was located. So towards the northern side of the fairground, and the real center here is the basin, which is right here. I have a couple other photos in the slide deck that you'll see here. So perhaps some of you have read the Eric Larson book, Devil in the White City. That is a page turner. Great book, and I think I might be the only person who enjoyed the World's Fair stuff more than the serial killer stuff. But it's a good read. It's a good book. Yeah. So this fair, this was the White City because this was the first World's Fair that had electricity at night, on the outsides of buildings. And so when the sun went down, the fair didn't stop. Okay? Chicago did a pretty good job of getting a who's who of American architecture to participate in the planning here. So Daniel Burnham was kind of the top guy, but that's not to say he was the only one. Louis Sullivan also was involved with some of the building designs, and Frederick Law Olmsted, a landscape architect, was also in charge of kind of designing the fairgrounds. So you'll hear more names that as we go along here that probably sound familiar. Most of the buildings, and this is par for the course with turn of the century World's Fairs, are temporary structures. They're temporary. They're made out of a kind of a plaster material called staff. And after a 6-month run of the fair, exposed to the elements, a lot of these buildings are in pretty rough shape. There are some exceptions. If you go to Chicago today, most notably the Museum of Science and Industry was the fine arts building at this fair, and then just outside there's still kind of the remnants of the Japanese gardens that were in this fairground. And just so happens, 1893 was also the year that the lead draftsman at Louis Sullivan's firm, a guy by the name of Frank Lloyd Wright, decided to leave Sullivan's firm and go out on his own. And if you can kind of imagine some of the architectural elements that are in like a Japanese pagoda, you can kind of see some of those horizontal lines in Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. But the Japanese gardens, Wright spent a lot of time in 1893 in this part of the fair. This is pretty wild. So with 3 weeks left in the fair, so it closed at the end of October in 1883, there was a Chicago Day. 750,000 people attended on that day alone. It set a world record for the largest attendance for an outdoor event, which is pretty remarkable. Imagine the bathroom lines, you know? My heavens. Yeah. Various entertainments. And this is not exclusive to Chicago. I mean, there are these, ride sorts of experiences at plenty of these world fairs around the turn of the 20th century. But you could ride in a gondola in the Canal of Venice, right? How do you compete with the Eiffel Tower that was erected 4 years earlier for the Paris World's Fair? Chicago had the Ferris wheel. It was not, if you remember from The Devil in the White City, it was not fully functional when the fair opened. And it was quite a scene. I think it was, for the first month and a half, one of the things people would do, they would watch the cars being hung. And if you do the math on that, that's 1,400 people on a Ferris wheel at capacity. Quite a few. This thing was massive. Now, Buffalo Bill was not officially part of the fair, okay, but because he didn't want to share any of the proceeds. So he just happened to lease a property right across the street from the fair, and patrons had no idea that Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show was not a part of the fair, okay? And it's amazing, the Cowboys win every time. Unbelievable. Some other exhibits. There were a number of national pavilions. Again, this is par for the course. Norway brought a Viking ship. It's kind of neat. There's a lot of natural history, kind of prehistoric models, things like this that are on display. Some of the products. This is the fair that gave us juicy fruit. And I think we might actually have one on the front of this table. I think Morgan said the collection here does have one of these Heinz pickle pins. I don't know how many of you have seen one of these things before, but Heinz out of Pittsburgh, when he got to his assigned stall in his exhibition building, he was horrified to discover that he was upstairs and all the way at the end of a corridor, tucked in a back corner. He says, "Oh no, no one's gonna come. No one's gonna come see the display." And so his marketing folks put together a free souvenir, the pickle pin, but you had to come to their pavilion. And sure enough, because everybody does, you gotta pay for everything else at the fair, people came in droves. Yeah, the Heinz pickle pin. They're life-size reproductions of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria with the Columbus connection. This was, they had moving pictures, the first commercial movie theater at this particular fair. And this is the fair where Louis Comfort Tiffany became a household name. So he had been involved in interior design for about 10 or 15 years prior to this. But for this fair, Tiffany designed a beautiful chapel. Well, you can't put a chapel in your house. But what product did Tiffany come up with and was first released in 1893? A lamp. So this is a Tiffany lamp. It's not from 1893, but for the next 25 years or so, Louis Comfort Tiffany lamps were a great home attainable Art Nouveau piece you could have at home. And then out near Lake Michigan, there was a moving walkway. You could stand or you could sit in like a pew, and it would take you out and bring you back. And the people movers at the airport, they still amaze kids today. So like, why would that be different in 1893? We also have on display, this was later patented, but the kind of the first prototype for, it's kind of like an early zipper, but it was a clasper for a shoe. So it was kind of a bulky, kind of a clumsy zipper type of thing, but again, products coming to market, or a test market, if you will. My college town of Milwaukee, Frederick Pabst, the brewer, he had this pavilion set up where you could have a sample of Pabst beer. I don't know how many trivia nights in Milwaukee I had to endure this trivia question, but no, Pabst did not win a blue ribbon at the fair. There were no blue ribbons awarded at this fair. What was awarded were gold medals. And so the blue ribbon was actually a thin blue ribbon that was tied around the neck of the bottle. It was just to distinguish it from other bottled beer at the time. Okay? And funny enough, right next to my alma mater of Marquette is the Pabst Mansion today. Can you see it? It was brought back to Milwaukee after the fair, and now this is where you can buy your ticket if you want to see his house. Yeah. Yeah, pretty cool. Ohio did have a building. A number of states had buildings at this particular fair. Your second stereograph of the slide deck here. But I wasn't asked to talk about this. So we get to the woman's building here. So this building was one of 12 major buildings in the fairgrounds, and it was the first one completed. It was finished in June of '92. The fair didn't open for 11 months after this thing was completed. The purpose of this building, as you might imagine, was to highlight women's achievements and challenge traditional ways of thinking at the time that it was built. The woman's building was planned, it was designed, and it was decorated entirely by women under the direction of a board of lady managers. Okay? Now, who to lead? This was one of the early dramatic aspects to this story. Who to lead this board of lady managers? And two profiles kind of emerged. Number one, should this be a wealthy socialite with connections, or should this be a middle-aged suffragist with kind of experience kind of working through these issues? And there were really two candidates that kind of vied for this position. The suffragist take, there was a group that called themselves the Isabella Society, after Queen Isabella, who funded Columbus's voyage in the late 15th century. And their take initially was, we shouldn't have a woman's building, because that would specifically remove women's achievements from the rest of the fair. That it would very much kind of encapsulate this off to a side. And why aren't women? They would ask the question, why aren't women's achievements just celebrated everywhere else in other pavilions throughout the fairground? Okay. Ultimately, it's the socialite that gets chosen to lead this group. Okay. The board of lady managers, unsurprisingly, are all white. There is a notable, there was a notable black woman in Chicago at the time. You might have heard the name of Ida B. Wells before. She and an elderly Frederick Douglass actually co-authored a pamphlet. Wells stated that she personally handed out about 15,000 copies of this pamphlet, which was titled, "The Reason Why the Colored American is Not in the World's Columbian Exposition." Okay, so the building itself here was designed by Sophia Hayden. You'd be forgiven if you're not familiar with the name. But she was one of 14 architects to submit a design for the building. And her design of Italian Renaissance, a three-story building with Corinthian columns, was ultimately chosen. Hayden was the first female graduate of the 4-year program in architecture at MIT. And she was in her early 20s when she won this design. Again, you can just look at her lifespan. I mean, you would think that in her early 20s that this would have made her career. And this is the only design of Hayden's that was ever built. Only one. She received $1,000 for this design. This is kind of at a time when male architects were earning about $5,000 to $10,000 for these chosen designs. And during the construction, so when this building was actually getting built, her design principles were repeatedly compromised by incessant changes demanded by the construction committee. We can't do this, we can't do that. And then the socialite, Bertha Palmer, eventually fired Hayden from the project. And Hayden was absent at the building's dedication ceremony. And this set off fierce rumors that she had suffered some sort of mental breakdown, or she suffered from mental exhaustion. And this was held up as proof that women were not suited to the architecture field. Okay? other aspects. Oh, and I mentioned yeah, it seems by about 1900 she had just totally given up on pursuing architecture as a career. Kind of a sad end. Here's kind of another sad anticlimactic finish, but the pediment above the main entrance was designed by a woman by the name of Alice Rideout, and she did this. She got the commission when she was 19, and then it was constructed, and then I have this. Yeah, here we go. And after the fair, she returns to her native San Francisco. She got married. She abandoned her art career. She moved to New York. She got married a second time. And there was a book that came out in the early 80s about the woman's building. And the author of this book wrote where after her second remarriage, she, quote, disappeared from history, unquote. But she lived until 1953, 60 years after this fair. And again, no career to speak of in the arts. The last exterior feature I'll mention. Now this is a name. Enid Yandel. She had a career. She really did. She was from Louisville, Kentucky. And if you go to Louisville and you know where to look, you will find a number of sculptures in public spaces, in public places that she did. She sculpted the four caryatids that supported the railing of the roof garden of the woman's building. So again, these caryatids kind of take on the Erechtheion from the Acropolis of ancient Athens. She was pretty famous. She studied under Auguste Rodin in Paris. She came back. She also did a statue of Daniel Boone for the Kentucky Pavilion here at this fair. And again, she has numerous works throughout Louisville and beyond. Now, if we go inside the building, there's another view of the balcony. Okay. If we go inside the building, this is not atypical for these exhibition buildings where there's lots of kind of stalls with themed areas, often separated by geography. I will note that this is right on a water feature. And now this was the lagoon, which was less of an issue with water, with tides. But for a lot of the fair that was right along Lake Michigan, depending on the time of day, the water level could rise or fall 4 or 5 feet. And the fair designers figured out, or well, they thought, well, when the tide is down, we don't want people to see a 4 or 5 foot muddy embankment. We don't want that. And so they designed, it's pretty ingenious, a hedgerow that would basically rise and fall with the tide. So you would just see greenery and there would be no muddy embankment to ruin the view. Okay, pretty amazing. This is the ground floor. There was a second floor as well. You can see that middle space is certainly open. Okay, and then there are other rooms on the second valley. This is the Hall of Honor. Okay, the main gallery in this structure. I will direct your attention to a 70-foot ceiling with no support pillars or columns that would disrupt the view of this open space. This was, again, to showcase the advancement of women through history. Candace Wheeler was responsible for the interior design of this building. She is traditionally credited as the mother of interior design, and she was one of America's first woman interior and textile designer. She had done a lot of work with Louis Comfort Tiffany prior to this fair. Now, if you look at the top of the ends of this gallery, there were a pair of murals. Okay, two huge murals that measured. You can see this here. 12 feet tall and 58 feet across. Okay. On one side, the mural was entitled "Primitive Woman," and the one that was juxtaposed on the opposite side was called "Modern Woman." And the Primitive Woman mural was done by an artist by the name of Mary McMonnies Lowe, and the Modern Woman was done by Mary Cassatt, who's a pretty big name. Now, she was a bigger name in France because she was kind of the great American impressionist that had spent much of the last 20-odd years in French, buddying up to all these French painters. So she was about 50 years old when the fair opened. And I have a couple of shots here. So, Primitive Woman, and this is Modern Woman by Mary Cassatt. Mary McMonnies, by pairing her mural in the same room as Mary Cassatt, it gave her quite a boost of reputation. Okay. Now, in a letter to a friend, Cassatt had written, "I am going to do a decoration for the Chicago exhibition. When the committee offered it to me, at first I was horrified. But gradually, I began to think that it would be great fun to do something I had never done before, as the bare idea of such a thing put Degas into a rage." They were friendly. Okay? And so she says, "I got my spirit up, and I said I would not give up the idea for anything." So Cassatt's mural had a feminist feel to it. It presented contemporary women passing knowledge to new generations, women creating art, and women who were ambitiously pursuing their dreams. So there was kind of three set pieces: a left panel, a central panel, and a right panel. Young girls pursuing fame on the left. This one, young women plucking the fruits of knowledge or science. And then, probably the boring one, art, music, and dancing. You know, less of a statement here, but nonetheless, these were the three pieces of this composition. Now, when the fair ended, again, these are temporary structures. Okay, so the vast majority of these 200 buildings were just demolished. The mural was taken down, and it was put into storage at the Palace of Fine Arts, which is now the Museum of Science and Industry, which still stands. Okay. There was some correspondence that it seems to suggest that there was interest in displaying it again, perhaps in another museum, but the trail went cold in the early 20th century. This mural has vanished. We don't know what happened to it. It's most probably it was destroyed in either a warehouse fire, or somebody just didn't know what it was and it got thrown away. Yeah. This is a book. This was published in 1894, and it was kind of a summary
if you will, of this building. The chapters inside were written by various individuals, and some of the chapters speak to the exhibits within. This is kind of fun. The preface that the publisher included here: the World's Columbian Exposition has afforded woman an unprecedented opportunity to present to the world a justification of her claim to be placed on complete equality with man. Okay. So some of the chapters: the building and its decorations, women illustrators, the New York literary exhibit, the work of Cincinnati women in decorated pottery, women in science, and there were some patents and the modern kitchen on display there. Women in literature, the evolution of women's education in the United States. There was a chapter on associations of women by Julia Ward Howe, who was quite old at this time. She wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic, right? The new lyrics to the John Brown's Body, too. Other exhibits: cottage industries in Scotland and Ireland, philanthropic work of British women, British nurses exhibit, women's position in the South American states, music in the women's building. There were semi-monthly concerts, and this is a quote from this book, at which only women or girls who are amateurs, possessed of talent and a high order of musical ability, and who have been residents of America for at least 10 years, will be permitted to appear. And then they would audition to a jury. And then this one's kind of fun. Quote, no musical prodigy will be admitted simply as such, nor is the diploma of any college or conservatory either necessary or sufficient. Oh. Okay. Okay. There was quite a bit of art as well, as you might imagine, on display here. There were applied arts as well. So various art mediums, watercolors, sculpture, embossed metals, paintings. Of the Empress of Russia, her son was Nicholas, Tsar Nicholas, that the Bolsheviks took care of in the revolution. Right? She was still alive at the time. In the applied arts categories, you would see carpets, curtain embroideries, wallpaper designs, handheld fans, plates, enamel glass, furniture, leatherwork. And all of this stuff wasn't necessarily for sale, though, as you will see on the front counter, you could buy a lot of stuff. There were souvenirs to be had at the World's Fair. I'm actually, of all things on this table, I'm probably most intrigued by this this three-piece glass set here. I hope you can take a moment and take a look at this when you come up here. And a final chapter, designs for book covers. Those are kind of neat. There was also a World's Congress of Representative Women that was held. It was a week-long convention that was held in conjunction with the World's Fair here. Speeches were given by almost 500 women from 27 different countries. And I found a program, quite a who's who. Three of those four names, Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, and Carrie Chapman, or would later be Carrie Chapman Catt, 3 of them have appeared on U.S. postage stamps. You know, it took a couple generations, but sure enough, here they are. This is the tidal basin, and I might throw out there that perhaps the most famous female depiction at the fair was the statue of the Republic, which was, again, a temporary structure. This was a mid-career design by sculptor Daniel Chester French, who 20 years earlier he had done the Minutemen statue at Concord Bridge in Massachusetts, and at the end of his career he would do the seated Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial in the 1920s when that opened. So he did this. Again, that's temporary. If you go to Chicago now, if you go to Jackson Park, you will see a 1/3 replica of the Statue of the Republic, which was put up in 1918 for the 25th anniversary of this fair. So I do have a couple of items that I would direct your attention to. I have no idea where a grad school colleague of mine found this, but maybe a year ago he sent me an official souvenir postal from the World's Columbian Exposition. I'm kind of a postcard guy. Oftentimes, I've heard in a few different places that it's the 1893 Chicago Fair that really popularized postcards in the United States, especially for kind of the farm wife of the rural Midwest. Like, this was a relatively cheap way to correspond with long distances. And you'll note there is not a divided back. The divided back on a postcard, one side for a message, one side for the address, that's a 1907 innovation. So there is just a U.S. grant 1 cent post, 1 cent stamp kind of already affixed to the card. And then a couple days ago, I was able to convince the archivist at Ohio Northern to loan me what Ohio Northern submitted to the fair. Now, we were known as Ohio Normal University at the time. And so one of our faculty members, a woman by the name of Eva Maglot, we have a dormitory in her name on campus still today. She brought a couple of items. We have one of them. She has a herbarium. It's a pretty weighty folio on the far side of the table there with pressed flowers and plants. And for this, again, this might be the only time you get to do this, folks. So don't just leave too early. But Ohio Northern also received a medal from the World's Fair. So the caption on this thing mentions that Ohio Normal University was the only school in America because the first prize went to a school in Russia. And it's kind of weighty, so you know you can't hurt it, but you know, yeah, come check out a medal. So so with that, I mean, what is the legacy of the woman's building at the 1893 fair? The intent, no doubt, was to celebrate the progress of women, demonstrate expanded opportunities outside the home, but some women did criticize the existence of this structure, arguing that women's achievements displayed separately would suggest that they were secondary to men. And the hope that a women's museum might be created from the remnants of this pavilion, as was done when the Crystal Palace closed in 1851. That was the impetus for 3 different London museums in the Kensington area. That never happened. That museum never opened. So the range of images that women made to decorate their buildings endorsed changing fortunes, the passing of a torch to a younger generation with hope that opportunities lay ahead which had been denied it in the past. So that's all I have. I invite you to come to the front table and check out some artifacts. I think we have some